Hello and welcome to this video that introduces our new open access book on scale-ups, entitled Scale-ups and High Growth Firms, Theory, Definitions and Measurement. My name is Alex Coad.
Hi, I'm Bornhäll, researcher at the Institute of Retail Economics in Stockholm, Sweden.
Hi, my name is Sven-Olov Daunfeldt. I'm Professor of Economics and the Chief Economist of the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise here in Stockholm. And I'm also one of the co-authors of the book Scale-ups and High Growth Firms.
Hi everyone, I'm McKelvie from the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University. Thanks so much for your interest in our new book on scale-ups and high growth firms. I hope you enjoy it.
This video gives a quick overview of the main ideas in the book. For a more complete explanation and full details on the references we cite, please see the book itself. Did I mention that it is open access? You can download it for free from the link shown below. Let's start by looking at the definition of high growth firms. When organisations such as Eurostat or the OECD give data on high growth firms, they have in mind something with a precise definition. The definition is as follows. A high growth firm is a dummy variable that equals 1 for firms that have at least 10 employees in the initial period and a geometric average of at least 20% growth per year over 3 years. For the sake of completeness, we can write the same thing in mathematical notation, initial size of 10 employees and 20% average growth rate per year, where growth rates can be measured in either sales or number of employees. In the literature, some say that scale-ups are synonyms of high growth firms and that scale-ups are defined in the same way as high growth firms. We will try to explain why this is not the case. A simple yet useful way of starting to think about scaling up is to consider this stage of growth model, drawing on ideas from Steve Blank. First comes the time for search, then the time for execution. There are 4 stages. Stage 1 is about customer discovery. Founders translate company ideas into business model hypotheses, test assumptions about customers' needs, and then create a minimum viable product, an MVP. Stage 2 is customer validation. The startup continues to test hypotheses and seeks to validate customers' interest through early orders or product usage. If there is no interest, the startup can pivot by changing one or more of its hypotheses. Stage 3 is customer creation. The product is refined enough to sell. Using its proven hypotheses, the startup builds demand by rapidly ramping up marketing and sales spending and scales up the business. Then finally, stage 4, company building. The business transitions from startup mode with a customer development team searching for answers to functional departments executing its model. Note that scale-ups are not 0 days old firms, because they should already have spent some time passing through stages 1 and 2 before reaching the scale-up stage, which is stage 3. Our reading of the literature leads us to suggest 8 propositions about scale-ups. Number 1, a scale-up is a concept born of practitioners, not academics. A scale-up is a concept that appeared on the scene without having the detailed definition that academics might usually come up with, and therefore academics are trying to catch up in this area of research and develop rigorous analytic methods. Number 2, scale-ups are not just in the IT sector, information technology sector, but may be found in all sectors as they harness the power of IT processes and digital strategies. Number 3, a scale-up is a qualitative concept from a stages of growth model. Number 4, scaling up involves structural transformation. The structure of the firm at the end of scaling up is very different from the structure at the beginning. Number 5, a scale-up does not exist anywhere in a pure form. No firm can be 100% composed of scale-free resources. This is a problem for empirical research because it means that we have to fix an arbitrary cutoff point for distinguishing between scale-ups and almost scale-ups. Number 6, scale-ups differ by degree, not by kind. Scale-ups and non-scale-ups are not different species, but are quite similar. The threshold we put in place to distinguish between scale-ups and non-scale-ups is arbitrary and artificial. Number 7, many scale-ups are exceptions. For example, we might think that scaling up is profitable growth, and everyone says that Uber is a scale-up. But Uber made huge losses up to and including the time of its IPO, initial public offering. There seem to be many exceptions between what scholars think are defining features of scale-ups and which firms are widely recognized in popular discussions as scale-ups. Number 8, there may never be a standardized empirical definition of scale-up. One reason for this would be because researchers have different variables in their datasets. Despite a standardized definition of high-growth firm, thanks to Eurostat OECD 2007, researchers keep putting forward their own new definitions all the time, and so the situation will only be worse for scale-ups. This is an illustration of what we mean when we say that scale-ups and non-scale-ups differ by degree and not by kind. They are not separate species. Here we have two graphs corresponding to two scenarios. The horizontal axis is the variable used to distinguish between scale-ups and non-scale-ups. The vertical axis is the number of firms. The red dashed line is the cutoff point that we impose to distinguish between scale-ups and non-scale-ups. On the right, the distribution has two peaks, which would be nice because it would allow us to think that there are two separate populations of firms, scale-ups and non-scale-ups. But on the left, the distribution has one peak. There is no clear difference between scale-ups and non-scale-ups, and any distinction we make between them seems much more arbitrary. Unfortunately, the figure on the left fits reality better than the figure on the right. Scale-ups and non-scale-ups are not radically different species, but differ only with respect to the arbitrary threshold that we impose. The previous literature has put forward various definitions of scale-ups, and some are more useful than others. Let's start by repeating the idea that scaling up is not just about high growth. Scaling up is a stage of development rather than a permanent characteristic of a firm. Scaling up is when a firm delivers a proven concept after having spent time learning what customers want and iterating the design. Scaling up involves standardization and automation while pursuing efficiency gains, and where growth is fueled by intangible assets and low marginal costs. Less useful definitions include defining scale-ups using the same definition as for high-growth firms. We don't need to reinvent the wheel by giving new labels for existing phenomena. Scale-ups may benefit from a diverse management team, but this is not a defining characteristic. Also, scale-ups may be international, but many scale-ups aren't, so we don't need to make this a defining characteristic. Absorptive capacity is difficult to measure and not necessarily closely related to the theoretical definition of a firm in the stage of scaling up. There is also the definition that scaling up involves spreading excellence within an organization as it grows, which is a nice idea but somewhat impractical. Here we have our theoretical definition of a scale-up. Scale-ups are a subset of high-growth firms that have a specific style of growth that requires ramping up production of a new product or service. This product has finished the processes of refinement. The business model need not pivot but has become clear, and no further iteration stages are required to find a good fit with the market. All that remains is scaling up. Crucial elements of this definition are that scaling up is a stage in the stylized life course model of firm evolution. Scaling up changes the proportions of a firm in terms of raising fixed costs, reducing marginal costs, having an above average capital intensity in terms of tangible capital and intangible capital, and also with regards to IT and perhaps also robots and automated systems. Scaling up connects favourable supply-side conditions to favourable demand conditions. Supply-side conditions are favourable because initial product development costs are near their end and because there are low marginal costs of production. Demand conditions could be favourable because of increasing returns due to network externalities. Scaling up is often observed alongside a burst of marketing effort to accompany what is essentially a pent-up supply-side push towards a hungry market. Regarding our empirical definition, i.e. how to measure scale-ups in real-world datasets, we start by thinking about what would be the desirable statistical properties for an indicator. First, we would like a binary variable, a dummy variable, that takes value 1 for firms that are scale-ups and 0 otherwise. Then we want to be sure that firms that are generally considered to be stereotypical scale-ups would not be classified by the definition as non-scale-ups. For example, if Uber is widely considered to be a stereotypical scale-up, but our indicator would not classify it as a scale-up, we would have to rethink our indicator. Importantly, the indicator should be standardized and comparable across time and across regions and countries, because there is interest in counting and comparing the number of scale-ups across contexts. Finally, scale-ups should not be too rare, because otherwise this causes statistical problems. This slide presents our empirical definition of a scale-up. Essentially, a dummy variable takes the value of 1 if a firm satisfies the requirements of a scale-up. There are 2 steps in identifying scale-ups. In the first step, we select the set of high-growth firms, HGFs, where growth is measured in terms of employment. In the second step, we select the subset of scale-ups from among the set of high-growth firms by referring to 7 conditions. Number 1, scale-ups have a non-negative change in marketing. Number 2, the age of scale-ups is below the median for the set of high-growth firms. Number 3, scale-ups have a non-negative change in intangible assets. Number 4, scale-ups have a non-negative growth of inventory. Number 5, scale-ups are in the digital ICT sector. Number 6, for scale-ups, growth of sales is faster than growth of employees. And number 7, scale-ups have high margins, for example, operating margins above 30%. In the second step, firms do not need to satisfy all 7 of these conditions to qualify as a scale-up, because this would be unnecessarily restrictive and it would select only a tiny number of firms. Instead, firms that satisfy 4 or 5 out of 7 conditions in the second step can qualify as scale-ups. The 7 conditions are based on the theory of scaling up, although they also have some disadvantages. Condition 1. Scale-ups spend more on marketing. An advantage is that scaling up is the stage when a firm has a market-ready product, but a drawback is that marketing need not cost much to be effective. For example, viral marketing as applied by Hotmail and LinkedIn. Condition 2. Scale-ups are relatively young. An advantage is that scaling up usually occurs when young single-product firms launch into growing their first product, but a drawback is that it is rare, although not impossible, for mature multi-product firms to scale up. Condition 3. Scale-ups strive to reorganize in order to have large fixed costs and low variable costs. An advantage is that a defining feature of scale-ups is that marginal costs of production are low, spurring on dramatic increases in scale. But a drawback is that marginal costs can be hard to measure. Also, fixed costs may grow as firms become larger. Condition 4. Scale-ups have non-negative growth of inventory. An advantage is that scaling up is a stage of rapidly increasing production to accompany the product launch, but a drawback is that inventory is not a useful concept in some sectors, for example, software as a service. Also, demand might outstrip supply for some scale-ups, such that inventory is not positive. Condition 5. Scale-ups are in the digital ICT sectors. An advantage is that the prototypical scale-up is a digital firm because digital strategies have near zero marginal costs of production, low cost distribution and network effects. But a drawback is that ICT is a general purpose technology that can be applied in all sectors. There is broad agreement that scale-ups can be found in all sectors, not just ICT. Condition 6, scale-ups are the subset of high-growth firms with the highest growth of sales per employee and sales divided by costs. An advantage is that if marginal costs are low, total revenues grow faster than the growth of inputs. But a drawback is that due to the freemium business model, for example, and the focus on growing the user base while delaying value capture, scale-ups may remain in a position of relatively slow sales growth. Condition 7, scale-ups have high gross margins. An advantage is that the prototypical scale-up is a tech firm in an emerging market that strives for a monopoly position in order to obtain high margins. But a drawback is that some scale-ups are not profitable even after completing their IPO, initial public offering, such as Uber. As mentioned earlier, firms do not need to satisfy all 7 of these conditions to qualify as scale-ups, because this would be unnecessarily restrictive and it would select only a tiny number of firms. High-growth firms that satisfy 4 or 5 out of 7 conditions in the second step can qualify as scale-ups. The book contains some preliminary results for Swedish data. Okay, I'll stop there. For more details, please check out the book yourself, free to download at the link below. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.